Hi. Gaveling in a work session of the Anchorage Assembly on reapportionment and redistricting. We'll call the roll. Mr. Dunbar.
Dunbar.
P. Peterson.
Don Weddleton.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Felix Rivera.
Oscar P. Davidson.
Eric Croft.
Gretchen
Wemhoff.
Dennis, we have resource data.
We are trying out. We'll see how it works. That camera is putting us on Facebook Live. It was put on the website. I want to say if there's anyone out there, don't know if there is. We're not responding to things in real time. We're not responding to the comments even later. You can contact us, of course, anytime you want on the website, media.org, the assembly page, and you can email us individually or all of us. We want to be accessible, but just sometimes people expect if they see it on Facebook, they can get a reaction. They won't necessarily be. We're not monitoring as we go. We're not necessarily going to review the comments, but we will read your emails. Mr. Train.
One question before we begin. Mr. Winter's here.
Yes.
He charges a lot of money now.
Yes.
Who's picking up the cost of him being
I heard you asking that before. Are you free today, Mr. Wheeler?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not. The municipal clerk's office asked me to assist with some GIS services related to mapping and some historical support if needed. The contract is being exercised through the municipal clerk's election project.
Yeah, and it's election related, of course. I wouldn't expect you would work for free. Yeah, okay. This is somewhat an amorphous, or I guess really 2 or 3 different things. Some members have asked for, and this will be a review of reapportionment and redistricting and how it works at the municipal level, because we are coming up to the 2020 census where we redraw the line. So there's that discussion. Mr. Gates, I believe, will start us out with some of the basics of that, a reapportionment or redistricting 101, if you will. Some of you, Mr. Cheney, know it very well. Others of us have some of that knowledge, but we'll all get on the same page. In addition, there have been 3 different proposals voiced. And Mr. Dunbar, you got yours drafted now. Do we have all 3?
Yeah, mine
Yeah.
is in very initial draft.
Coming to you, Mr. Yeah. So we also had a member saying to me, I want to learn more about just how we do this and what happens and what we do. We have 3 different proposals, mine, Mr. Constant, Mr. Dunbar's, on how we might change how we typically do it. So there'll be time to talk about those. What am I missing, Madam Clerk? Those 2, I thought there was kind of a 3rd. Anyway, it is redistricting in all its facets and reapportionment.
Shall we declare ourselves malapportioned?
That's right. That was a smaller one. There had been an email that said, I think you're malapportioned because here are the votes in one district and here are the votes cast in another. And Mr. Gates will tell us why that is not the way you look at redistricting. But we have the power at any time to declare ourselves out of malapportioned, which really just means that the districts aren't close enough to equal size. We typically do it only every 10 years on a census, but you could, if there were dramatic events that changed things so completely, you could do it in the stream. I had Mr. Weddleton, I think, then Mr. Strange.
So I just want to say I had actually asked Dean to make another version because we didn't have enough. There should be one for each of us, and it's just looking to do 6 2-member districts.
Yeah, that's what for.
I thought yours were.
So we'll go over later, but it's essentially mine to rotate the single, keep the same. So presaging, if we can think about it as we hear this discussion. Mine to same structure but rotate the single member. Chris Constance to have 11 single members. And now Forrest, which takes a charter change that would be 6 2s for a 12-member district or a 12-member assembly.
Correct.
Yeah, Mr. Gates.
Sure, and I apologize, Mr. Webster, I haven't gotten the draft yours yet. And one difference between Mr. Dunbar's proposal and Mr. Weddleton's, as I understand it, is Mr. Dunbar has the mayor having a tie-breaking vote, and Mr. Weddleton doesn't have that in his concept. So, and that, I guess, I will start with a short primer. on Reapportionment 101, and I guess from all the hundreds, maybe thousands of written things about reapportionment, case opinions, and so forth, that I've tried to condense the main things into this little 25-slide PowerPoint. So the municipality of Anchorage, and please let me know if I need to speak up or repeating. So when the municipality of Anchorage reapportionment began when we unified in 1975, when the Charter Commission proposed, I think it was 3 maps, I'm not sure if I got my historical accuracy here, to the public to vote on. And we had one that was, of course, adopted. And I guess you can probably guess which one, because 2 proposals had 4 districts, and I think 3 districts had 3 members each, 1 district had 2 members each. So it's really interesting to see what they were thinking about back then. And to our most recent reapportionment exercise in 2012, I was one of the main attorneys in the municipal attorney's office handling that, along with Mr. Wheeler when he was in that role. And this is the map we have today. This is our starting point, so to speak. It creates the benchmark from which we go forward from here. So what are the rules and the applicable law for reapportionment? And we covered this a little bit before, so I don't want to take too long. We've got, of course, our charter section 401 about apportionment, and the main phrases here are the assembly shall reapportion whenever it becomes malapportioned. That's sort of open discretion to malapportion. I mean, to reapportion at just about any time when there's finding of malapportionment, and that sentence seems rather exclusive of the rest. But there is a mandate to reapportion within 2 months from, by resolution, the adoption of the state's final redistricting plan under the Alaska Constitution.
Hold on.
Yes, sir.
Oh, finish, sorry. I thought you were moving on.
And once we have that process begun, within 2 months, we pass a resolution that determines we're malapportioned or not. And if we determine we're malapportioned, that second part, within 6 months, we need to pass an ordinance that reapportions the boundaries of the assembly districts. Okay?
Yeah, and so that's the nub of what we're talking about. I appreciate you putting that up. So we can, anytime we want, say we're malapportioned, and we must make that determination. You could, I guess, every 10 years say, well, we're still appropriately apportioned, but you must make that determination within 2 months of the redistricting plan by the state. Mr. Train.
Just so when Mr. Birch was on the subject with us, we dealt with this extensively. He wanted to say we're malapportioned. We determined we weren't.
Have you read your packet? That's one of your memos right there.
I know, I was here, okay? But the issue is that any time they sell, they can declare themselves malapportioned, which then sets up the process for redrawing the boundaries.
Right, and then that's our standard there, Dean, concisely put. The district shall be formed of compact and contiguous territory containing as nearly as practicable a relatively integrated socio-economic area. So relatively equal districts that have those characteristics.
Population is not 5.
Right. Mr. Gates, thank you.
Oh, sure. So next, what does the Alaska State Constitution say? Since our process hinges on the state completing theirs mandated by the Constitution, and I've got here some of these phrases when they start theirs in Article 6, Section 10, and it's tied to the official reporting of the decennial census, no later than 90 days after the board has been appointed and the decennial census. So I guess, suppose they delay appointment, that might delay the whole process 90 days after that. It's a little interesting because Section 3 says you shall reapportion immediately following the official reporting of each decennial census. But of course, they've worked it out to 90 days, regardless of that saying phrase immediately. And I wanted to note one thing here. There's nothing that says that the state does their redistricting process whenever. They are only tied to the U.S. Census, unlike our charter.
They don't do it in the middle. They do it every 10 years, and they don't have the power to do it just in the middle of that term.
That's what it sounds like to me. So what does the whole process look like? That's our applicable law. And of course, since I'm familiar with 2012 and it's the most recent, I pulled up the resolution where the assembly declared malapportionment and through to the ordinances that proposed various lines being drawn and so forth. As I wanted to note that courts have called this process a decidedly political process. So generally courts give a lot of deference to what the political body, legislative body decides to do with its boundaries. It's pretty much a rational basis standard of review. Oh, yes. I was just noting some of the key phrases there in this resolution 2012-81. The whereases, and I've got a few of these historically from the 2001 reapportionment and the 91. The resolutions, I think that we recycled them. They have a lot of the same whereas paragraphs at the beginning, noting when census was completed, and that in case the assembly is malapportioned, but then the assembly votes on this, whether they agree that with that data and or not. And then the section 1 is the declaration of malapportionment, and that within 6 months, the assembly shall make the adjustments necessary. So 6 months later, or maybe a little less, in 2012, we had 4 proposals with maps attached to each of them. And the one on the left here is the one that was voted on and adopted. And it's a little interesting that in some of the prior reapportionment procedures, I guess at least 2 of them I saw, the assembly proposed a single resolution and they had various maps, and they decided by a vote, we're going to adopt that map and attach it to the resolution. Whereas here and several other times, we had like 5, here there's 4, in 1986 there were 6 separate resolutions, each with their own reapportionment map and plan. So what is malapportioned? You know, that's the question that you will have when you have a resolution for that determination. So some of these things define what it is, that case law. First, the Equal Protection Clause, the general principles of one person, one vote, and that every person should have fair and effective representation on the legislative body. Those are the overriding federal constitution guiding principles for making sure that wherever the lines are drawn and however it's configured, that there's a substantial equality of population among the election districts. So, and we have that here, of course. So, new population data within current districts is compiled, and you've got current districts, but the population changes. So we get a new census, you get that data, and see how it's changed within districts. And then the question is, looking at that, the total deviation now with the updated population data greater than 10% total deviation. And I'll explain deviation a little bit more in a few minutes. But if it's greater than 10%, there's a presumption that that it's malapportioned. It can be rebutted by some concepts and some arguments that courts have recognized. One municipal attorney opinion acknowledged that in one case. A court upheld 16.93 total deviation from the target represented population number. So it can happen, but that's unlikely. And really, if the target is substantial equality of population, you want to avoid that. I think where we see those kind of arguments for some good cause to go above 10% is where you have election districts that cover some subdivision political boundaries. They cross them. For example, Metsu in the municipality of Anchorage, we have a House district now that spans across our boundary. So some courts have recognized when it's necessary to do so, so political boundaries might have greater deviation. And of course, my counsel is don't do that. I don't think we have any need to in the municipality of Anchorage. So, let's see. Oh, yes, as I was saying, first we get the total population of the whole municipality. You divide that by 11, right? That's our number of elected representatives. then we got our target population per representative, right? So in here, I'll have that number later, it's about 26,000 something people per representative. But then you've got the population within each district. You compare that to the target, and we compare that to the target population for that district, and the actual number, you've got a deviation. And you can use that deviation to calculate the percent deviation. So one district may be overrepresented and another district is underrepresented. You know, if they've got a little more than the target population overrepresented, you've got a positive deviation. And if you're underrepresented, you have a little less than your target. So the total deviation is the sum of the district that has the highest overrepresentation and the percent of the district that has the lowest underrepresentation.
Yeah, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gates, would you mind going back one slide? Just for a
Sure.
second. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. I think we have 2 hours total, don't we?
Yes, we'll get
No.
one.
I'm trying not to rush us then. So I pulled up a couple of past malapportionment findings and the data that the Assembly based their determination on at that time. So of course 2012 and 181 is the resolution that started the process. And here we see, whoops, I'm sorry. I have here clipped an excerpt out of the resolution of Tweed, and that excerpt is from the Assembly memorandum attached to the resolution from Assembly member Chris Birch at the time, describing the changes since 2001, the districting, changes in population from the census, and then with the contractor calculating the deviations after 2010 population numbers were applied, that the total deviation is at 10.6%. And so we've got the data tables here, and you can't really see it in the left column. That's our districts, 1 through 6, and then the total. So total population, the TA persons is total of all persons in the district. And we have then the second column is the target population. So that's the substantially equivalent population for representation. And of course, one single member is half of the rest, 2 members.
Mr. Trainee?
If you look at, on the right side, Chugach River, 11%. That's the reason if you take a look, for example, in Muldoon, Eagle River Chugach represents part of Muldoon. Generally, we could bring them into compliance because that was way too large, 11%. They don't have a population base out there. So we sucked part of Muldoon into your area to even out the numbers. And that's what you've got to do when you go through this, is take a look at each district to make sure they're plus or minus a certain percentage and they're all equalized as much as you can. We use census tract to do this with. And GIS is a wonderful tool because you can actually get on a computer and move the lines and see how they affect the overpopulation of each area.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Mm-hmm. And yes, as Mr. Trainee was noting, the right is from the 2001, which is reading that data. And if you add the minus 11% and the 9%, you've got 20% total deviation from the target. So that's a bit more significant than we had in 2012 with the 2010 census data. So that's the example of the type of data that you would see when you have a resolution before you. So historically, the municipality, I just wanted to note like 2 anomalies that were different from the process I've been talking about so far. We have the decennial census report released, and then districting. So 2 times though that I noted something different happened. One is in 1991, the resolution finding malapportionment was rejected by the Assembly. Mr. Trainee, you might remember that as well. I think you were there. And the municipal attorney, in his opinion, the Assembly, in his instructions, hit on this earlier, said that while the 10% deviation, total deviation from a target represented population it's presumptive, but courts have upheld the 16.94 deviation for good reason. And I tried here to find the data and looking at the minutes, and I ran out of time. I didn't find what numbers they were actually looking at in 1991. But regardless, it seemed like there might have been some question. Maybe it was a close call. And even though it was rejected, the Assembly moved to redraw lines minimally. They simply moved 1% from one district to the adjacent district. And Mr. Craney, I think you had co-sponsored that ordinance, 1991-182. So the other anomaly, I think, was in 1988. I'm sorry, I think that might have been 1986-76, or I might have that number wrong, just to note that. So I had 6 proposals. They were trying to address a change in how they counted population at that time. And I clicked an excerpt here that you can read. The U.S. Bureau Census started to count all military personnel as residents of where their base was stationed. And here the change then was all of a sudden counting 16,000 additional people on Fort Wych and Elmendorf, well now Jaber. And so, of course, in that one area of town, that throws things up quite a bit just by that one move to calculate population a little differently. So the Assembly engaged in a districting process, a reapportionment process at that time. They had 6 proposals before them. I think that that's the kind of circumstance and incident that you look at where you might want to do a reapportionment under our charter, where it says we can do it whenever we're malapportioned. And I note that because if there's not some unusual circumstance like that, there is, of course, the normal population shifts where people move and people become of voting age, or there's births and deaths and so forth. And those are just normal population changes. And the case law is sort of indicative of those don't really justify doing something extreme in redistricting. There's not some express limitation, though, on doing finding malapportionment any time in our charter. So next you find the malapportionment, then 6 months later, after having either some municipal department or a contractor working with them, and whichever assembly members are working on it, perhaps a committee or so forth, you need to draw the lines, and I've tried to outline here some of the basic rules for those. And Mr. Croft was pointing that out in our charter language earlier. And Section 401, first they've got to be compact. You don't want them stretched out all over the place. Contiguous territory, right, or bordering each other. Relatively integrated socioeconomic areas. And I think that Mr. Rivera talked about that at some points in the past, where he made the state does this intensive study of socioeconomic status throughout the state to make sure they are drawing their lines relevant to that factor. We have some case law that I will quote a little later about how that applies in the municipality of Anchorage. Then we've got our federal law with the over 10% deviation, which I mentioned earlier. And then there's also some case law that says, well, if you've got over 5% in a single district, 5% and over, 5% under is 10%. It's kind of simple math. If there's over 5%, you want to give it a hard look at why it's drawn that way. There's no presumption or anything though attached to that. So the process is crafting the lines in compliance with those two. Then there's the second part of the process is the Voting Rights Act. And I need to mention that the Voting Rights Act has been changed by the U.S. Supreme Court in recent years. I think it was 2014. There was a case out of Allegheny County, and the Voting Rights Act has a title that required pre-clearance. They found that certain jurisdictions that they named had a history of discrimination in their, well, I don't want to state it incorrectly, but suffice it to say that they were going to require these districts, if they made changes to their boundaries or changes to their election codes, that they had to first submit them, approve them, submit them to the U.S. Department of Justice. They had a division dedicated to reviewing these and get pre-clearance for those before they could become effective. And so the municipality of Anchorage, actually all of Alaska, was subject to that pre-clearance requirement because we had a significant number of language minorities across the state, Alaska Natives, and they were, the Voting Rights Act trying to protect them from, I guess, unfair results, unfair lines drawn, and so forth. Well, that pre-clearance requirement was invalidated by the U.S. Supreme Court, as I mentioned, but the rest of the Voting Rights Act requirements are still in place as far as I know. And those are, so after we've drawn them in accordance with our charter and equal protection, we then can adjust them minimally to conform to Voting Rights Act requirements. That process is taking the benchmark, which is the current or the last time the lines were redrawn, last time reapportionment took place. The percent minority and percent for Alaska, percent native population within those boundaries now we're at the percent, and then proposing boundaries. And I have a little more detail on how that works and what those considerations are a few more slides down. So I apologize if that looks a little redundant here. The maximum population deviation, again, I've tried to demonstrate the numbers here rather than just the verbiage, and we've got the Equal Protection Clause and charter requirements. So I've circled here the most overrepresented district from the 2012 data we had, and the most underrepresented district, and there we've got our total in the table, a total population deviation of 2.45%. So it's some simple math, but the data can be difficult to understand for some folks. So the Voting Rights Act, as I mentioned, it's got certain things that must be taken into consideration. The voting age persons, or VAP, is the people of voting age belonging to a single minority group highly likely to be able to elect a candidate of their choice. So we have case law that says 35% or more is about the range where a minority has maybe a likely chance of selecting their candidate. And the Voting Rights Act requires that there's no regression about voting power, and that means taking into consideration the electoral behavior, how many of those in that minority group vote the same way together as a block, and maybe they're just all over the place and voting based on other types of lines or political ideologies. Their participation, or their voting, or they're not, maybe they're not going to elections, even though you have, from the census data, voting age population, maybe less than half of them, or a small fraction, are actually casting ballots, and the history, voting patterns, the registration and turnout. So the Voting Rights Act also said if you do sort of have some regression in a district, you're decreasing a minority voting population in one district that can be offset by increases in another district. So you will see that in some of the data we looked at in 2012. I had in the bottom of the left some percentages here. So District 1 downtown had a 56.9% minority, but they were all types of minorities. The highest number of a single identified minority was Native at 19.8%. So that doesn't meet the 35% presumption for a minority voting district. Let's see. So you're looking at some of the data from 2012 and how that analysis works. These tables look similar to what you saw on the corner of our map, but you notice the two columns on the right, in each one there's a minority percent and a native percent. And so the first table here on the left is using boundaries that were currently in place, right? And the population data from the 2010 census and drawing that out so you can see where we are. And then I took two of our four proposals and the tables of that analysis within here. So you can see from the benchmark to the one at the top was a proposal that changed the single member district to Midtown. And it would show how the native population changed for each of these Midtown for the little bit of change. These percentages go up and down a little bit. I don't think they go up a significant number. And then the table at the bottom was the analysis for the a proposal that was pretty much keeping the same type of configuration, single member district downtown, and that's the one that was eventually adopted. So, as I had mentioned, I was going to talk about the socioeconomic integration factor. So in the 2001 Alaska Supreme Court case, this is what the court had to say. This was related to the state's redistricting process, but it noted that they didn't need to make any special changes to house district boundaries in Anchorage for the socioeconomic integration factor, because as you see what they've said, by definition it is its population sufficiently dense and evenly spread to allow multiple combinations of compact contiguous districts, minimal population deviations, few of any,
Yeah.
This seems absurd. This is Austin. This seems absurd to me. Have there been any more recent evaluations of whether they might have been wrong back in 2001 or 2 and how things have changed?
well, this is the Alaska Supreme Court. I don't think there's been something, but subsequent case law, not that I'm aware of, that actually points to this specific paragraph in language. But of course, where are we? 18 years later,
Right.
Perhaps some things have changed, and nothing prevents anyone from taking a closer look at that.
My guess is it was bad before and they were also ignoring it, but anyway.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So in 2012, we looked at this, and we didn't see data or any indications that this was any different at that time. Let's see. So this slide I put together, it's based on some dialogue we had recently where we had a constituent that was talking about your malapportioned now because you compare voters, the number of votes in 2008 to the number of votes in our recent election, you know, and how much they've changed and so forth. Well, the population basis is an important thing to consider. Do you remember the Constitution says on basis of population, and you want substantial proportionality based on population. It doesn't say based on registered voters or based on the number of voters who cast votes in an election. And as most of us know, each election voter turnout, it can fluctuate quite a bit. You get more in a mayoral election than others. So it doesn't seem like a good data set to use. And I clicked this excerpt from a Supreme Court case recently where they said Texas, like all other states, use the total population numbers. So in this case, there was a, Texas used total population and they drew their state house districts. But this group said if you look at this all district, there's 40% deviation if you compare, if you use registered voters within that district. And the court looked at this and said, well, maximum total population, which all states use in a lot of jurisdictions use, it's only 8.04%, which was within the acceptable range, right, to meet constitutional muster. So they pretty much said we're not compelled to use registered voter numbers instead. It's interesting, I guess, that here the court's saying we're rejecting that. I don't see a case, and I didn't find one, I looked a little bit, where a jurisdiction used registered voters or votes cast and then upheld it in light of a challenge by a group that wanted to use total population instead. You know, the opposite roles. I didn't find anything like that. So pretty safe, I think, and wise to use total population. I was trying to, I guess, show, for example, total population is everybody, and if you use a subset of that, of course, you've got few people, voting age population over 18. Then you've got an even smaller subset of that if you count only registered voters. And then you've got an even smaller subset if you only count the number of people who voted in an election. And I think that was the notion that was being tossed around about a month ago. So I was going to try to find some numbers that kind of demonstrated this, but I think that we probably get the idea clearly enough. So when boundaries are redrawn, then there's a little bit of outfall, some potential issues that arise that may be to be addressed, or that somebody wants to address or doesn't want to address. Again, it's decidedly a political process. So truncation of terms. Boundaries shift a lot, and then the body might say, well, we should probably let the people who have changed one district to another, slow it up now, elect someone of their choice and truncate the current member's term and so forth. Well, the Kentucky Court, so that's a Supreme Court case, they noted that it is an appropriate tool for a legislative body to apply in a reapportionment process. And they have pretty much discretionary authority to do so. If somebody challenges and says, and in the Kentucky case, it was a 1981 case where General Mr. Kentucky challenged the Anchorage Assembly's reapportioned boundaries, and he said that this requires truncation of terms. So he was arguing that we had to truncate because of the shifts in the population in the lines. The court said, well, asking for that as a remedy is very intrusive for a court to order. They need to find really compelling circumstances in order to order truncation. So when is it appropriate? And the court said it might be appropriate when the change in lines excludes substantial numbers of constituents previously represented, or includes numerous other voters that weren't in that district. But if it's just a normal shift in population, if it's not really greater than that, then it's not really a compelling reason to truncate terms. So I think if you keep, in some proposals we have for us, you keep the same configuration of a single member district downtown. However you draw the lines, it's probably not going to be greater than regular population change spread on 2010 numbers. If we move the single member district, maybe we look about what the implications are. So another issue that's come up in the past, and I'm sorry I didn't get out to finding how it was resolved in time for the work session today. But maybe any of you might recall, it's qualifications of members. So an assembly member has to remain a resident of the district, right, from where they were elected. But if you redraw lines and the member was previously here, the line moves now, or in District 3 instead of District 4, where you were elected from, can you continue in office? And Charter Section 402C says you're required to. I note though that 402D says the Assembly is the judge of the qualification of its members. So I guess there's a little way you could do at that point. And hopefully we're not in that kind of situation, but if we do, it's an issue to be aware of that we would like to address. And if needed, we will of course research this further with the shop issue.
Do you read D as saying that this is not a question for the court, that is, this is not a justiciable question, but that we determine if somebody has moved out or not a resident of the district, the courts don't?
Well, I read it as it's still a political question in some ways, and then of course it's still subject to someone withstanding, a voter to appeal to court and say, you don't have a rational basis for deciding the person's qualified or not. I hint out this, that there's maybe an argument saying even though we moved the lines, you're qualified to represent people where you lived for the last 30 years, and just because we moved lines doesn't mean you can't finish out the last 6 months of your term. And this is just hypothetically speaking. I am not sure how that argument has worked.
Probably a lot of discretion given to the assembly to determine those things.
Of course, there's some outfall when you change the lines, and you have a lot of discretion on how to handle the effects of those redrawn lines.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trainee, you may remember this. I hadn't thought about this in the context of what I was trying to prepare for you today, but I'm not going to call. There was a candidate for office.
Brian
early
Riddle.
2000. Yes.
Oh, there we go, Brian.
And there was,
She remembers good O'Brien.
yeah, and there was Superior Court litigation about the movement of the lines and whether or not, and I don't remember who the other candidate was, which one was the...
Paul Bauer. More
Yeah, and I believe that case would still be applicable, and if there was an issue about somebody challenging the qualifications because the line moved, and the argument was, no, he's been in the house, in that same residence all of this time, so it would be important to take that case as an habit.
Because the line moved in effect, yeah. That was
Right.
the decision made in the line.
Right, so that would, you might want to add that to your PowerPoint at some point.
That'd be interesting.
See if it applies to your discussion.
Eric?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Dean, would you take a look at the 91 election? Because in that case, we changed when we had the Senate elections from having in October to April. And so the people that ran for that seat that year had extra time put on their assembly seat. And so some terms were truncated. So we need to take a look at that because truncation is an interesting thing.
All right, let's do that. Truncation is an interesting thing.
Your seat is gone, it is.
So now I thought we might want to jump to the proposals that have been put before the body now. And I am sure I first have, well, this map is the one we currently have. That's our starting point. And we've got three, I guess, four, Mr. Weatherton, and sorry, I've allowed yours to this list. The AO 2018-114 from Mr. Constant, then Mr. Crops, and draft AO from Dunbar. So, these proposals are generally, they're not redrawing any lines, they're just giving directions, instructions to the assembly when it reapportions next time as to what to do. And so that's something to keep in mind when we look at some of these maps that we're going to show you. There are either historical maps when we previously tried to rotate single member district, two different proposals in 2012. So, I think Mr. Croft's proposal that would require rotating the district as a result, reapportionment might look something like this. And both of these were pulled from the ordinances back in 2012 that they were attached to. So this one moves the single member district to Midtown, and it's the does that work? Well, number 4 you can see is a lot smaller than it is now, and District 1 has grown quite a bit in size. There were some data on the top corner. It might be easier to read on the handout that the clerk is passing out now. It would, I think, just give you an idea of what would be the effect. And maybe it won't be number 4, or maybe it won't be 2, 6, wherever it moves out of number 1.
Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I just wanted to point something out here. I think that both these, it's a political decision, of course, but both of these strike me as sort of patently ridiculous. And the reason is because this area here, which is part of Muldoon, and I know it looks quite small, but it's one of the most densely populated parts of the state. There are probably as many people living here as the town I grew up in, right? So it's ridiculous to leave this gerrymandered to Eagle River while turning either Midtown or East Anchorage into a single-member district. A far more logical approach would be to attach this to East Anchorage, give a portion of Upper Mountain View, or I'm sorry, Lower Mountain View to downtown, and then attach the base to downtown and turn Eagle River Chudiak into the single-member district, which it was originally. So I mean, I get what he's trying to do here. It's just illustrative, but to me, trying to gerrymander stuff out to Eagle River when it's the smallest district and has the military base is absurd. And a much more logical approach would be to turn the Eagle River Chudiak into the single-member district.
Arguably.
Mr. Training.
Dean, would you let us know which one of these three proposals requires a charter change versus just a decision by the
Mr. Dunbar's and Mr. Weddington's, they require a charter change because they're changing from 11 members to 12, and the 11 members is in our charter. The other two that are just to change to 11 districts, the charter doesn't tell you how many election districts you need to have. It just tells you you need to have a total of 11 assembly members. 11 at-large assembly members, or about 1975 proposals, 4 districts, 3 of them with 3 members each, 1 to 2.
This is important data.
Will you be showing us mock 11 single districts?
Yes, we brought some mock-ups about.
Yeah, I was going to.
Can I just ask for clarification, Dean? I think I heard you say that the charter just requires we have 11 members. It doesn't say how that's apportioned, but we weren't sure. We want to make sure we did it correctly.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Thank you.
What else to say, either from Dean or Mr. Wheeler? There's an if in there. If you do it this way, you must do it.
Perhaps I can go back to our charter language. It's in my one of my earlier slides.
It's all right, Dean.
So, 11's the first sentence. Assembly of 11 members. Election districts, if you establish them, don't establish election districts. You've got 11 at-large members.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
silly no.
If I'm going to have to leave here in a couple of minutes, can we make sure that all of these materials are sent out electronically
Yep.
to the members, please?
Let's do that. Do that.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Mr.
can
Dunbar.
I have the opportunity to present my proposal before Mr. Rivera leaves?
Sure. How much more did you have, Dean?
If that's okay now, sure. And this is the 6 L2 maps put together for having 6 2-member districts. This is not one. These are just mock-ups, so nobody should take the lines too seriously at this point.
So
If Mr. Wheeler
If I might,
Mr. Wheeler.
the municipal clerk has some maps to hand out that are the same as these. But we can turn the lights off.
Sorry.
You can leave the lights off. Yeah, leave those on. A couple of things before you get too far into this. So the task to us, to my company, was to create some maps for this work session, looking simply at population without splitting any of your precincts. Okay? So this is not in any sense a legally defensible map based on our understanding of current demographics. So I don't want anybody to assume that this has some hidden motivation. It's purely, I task a GIS person, create the districts, try to move as few precincts as possible, don't split any precincts. Okay? So I just want to make sure everybody understands that this is conceptual only. It's not trying to imply that this is the way it should be done. That's all up to you guys, should you choose to take this path. And we're not trying to presuppose that this meets federal or state or local charter requirements in terms of being contiguous, compact, and socially, economically, etc. integrated. So with that big, huge caveat, this is draft map. Mr. Dunbar, you have a question about it, or?
Well, I just want this is a representation of the proposal that I've put forward, which is to expand to 12 12 members, which would be 6 dual-member districts, and I understand Mr. Weddleton might propose that as well. If the sticking point is the mayor's veto, I'm perfectly willing to take that out. That was just, I put that in there as a discussion point. We can discuss that one way or the other. But I like this proposal for a couple of reasons. One, I think that there is a inequality that's inherent in the single-member district. It means that you only have the one person to go to, and when they're absent or sick or whatever, you're not represented, which is different at the state level, where you have a representative and a senator. Two, so we're not rotating that inequality somewhere. I also dislike the total single-member district for the same reason, because I actually like the teamwork that's fostered by having 2 members in these relatively large districts. Now, what I like about this, and this is my first time seeing this, but as you can see, this chunk here of Muldoon is returned to East Anchorage where it belongs. And now we have a contiguous, compact, logical district. It seems like the other big difference here is that actually I would become part of downtown, which is fine. I'm perfectly happy leaving the body if that's what y'all want. But the Airport Heights goes downtown, which I think is would not be a radical departure from the kind of representation they use. Stepping in Heights is added to Midtown. I think that could make some sense as well. But you can see we have relatively little disruption to the current maps, and you get rid of some of the inequalities, and you have enough population to create a dual-member district downtown, which also, by the way, means all of our districts are a little bit smaller, which I think is also an inherent good, because, as you know, our districts are extremely large. The largest legislative district in Alaska, larger than state senate districts. And it's very cumbersome given the lack of staffing we have. So I think that's another benefit to this. So it does require a charter change. So.
Mr. Chairman, real quick, this helps you at all. As Mr. Dunbar noted, I'll give you the precinct or the district number these came from, and helps you right in here. So this dotted line represents the current boundaries. So that comes from Assembly District 2. This one here comes from Assembly District 5. This comes from Assembly District 5. Can you see it? No, you can't see it from here, this angle. Oh, I'm sorry. So this comes from 5, this comes from 5, this comes from 5, this comes from 5, this comes from 4, this comes from 3, this comes from 3, this moves from 6, and this moves from 4. That helps you at all to write those in. And the deviations based on, this is based on 2010 census data, by the way. So obviously taking into consideration changes coming up, this may change a little bit, but you'll see the deviations in the grid here in terms of how they compare to the delta. Welcome, Mr. Constant.
Thank you.
Can you see the map?
I cannot see the map.
Get on Facebook.
Next one.
Sure.
Okay, map 2. It's a little harder to see because of the size, but you should have 3 copies of map 2, so you can kind of dial in on North and South Anchorage a little bit more and see a little bit more detail. Again, the same principles apply in terms of just focusing on population, not splitting precincts, and again, not looking at any of the other factors that you would need to look at before you made a final determination on how you wanted to implement this, should you choose to go that route.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is this for the single member districts?
Yeah, 11 single member.
Because it says
yeah,
single member.
Don't follow that one. Go with this
single
one.
member district.
Yeah. I take no credit for this on this side. I just take credit for this part.
And the number for proposed District 2 population negative 26,000?
What?
But just,
It might just be a typo there.
okay.
Yeah, it might be a typo right there.
I was thinking that was counterproductive.
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little confusing because I asked the GIS person to label them one, top, left, right, top to bottom like you would read. So it's a little bit different. But I have the numbers for these carve-outs if you want them to kind of see where they're coming from relative to current assembly districts. Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Did you include turning an army Girdwood?
Yeah, so basically, if you look at the map 2B, basically everything south of the green is going to be part of the proposed District 2. And then there's an Eagle River Chubiak single.
Right. And that is proposed District 1, and there's a little bit more view of where that breaks between Chubiak and River. Dean, if you could go to this one. 2B or not 3? This is 2A. 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 Can you bring that over? So you can see the break right there.
And then that is actually going down Eagle River Road, not taking in Highland. Highland would be part of District 2.
I believe so, yes. And again, that may not make sense in terms of looking at socioeconomic factors. It's just looking at trying not to split a lot of precincts.
The rest of Eagle River's in Matsu.
It's just not quite on the map.
Yeah, we're used to that
Yeah.
with you city guys.
Yep.
What? Who do I say? Hey, yeah.
You can say it to everyone. Ms. Wilmot, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So I like the idea of thinking about 11 districts. I like the idea of thinking about it. And I think when we listen to everything that Mr. Gates has told us about the history and some of the barriers, or not barriers, but hoops we have to jump through to make sure that we're on the right status with the courts and the states and the census. I think it's kind of cool. I'm always worried about a catch-all district, you know, having run for office in a catch-all district. That's to go from Eagle River to Girdwood. Well, I guess that connects the Crow Creek Trail. You know, but it was just a thought that I'm worried about catch-all districts.
Hey, Chris, can you put that on mute, or whoever's there? Mute. So I debated and then finally asked Barbara and Dean and Dennis to mock up some. In some ways, it distracts us, right? Because we go right down to this should be done on a conceptual level. What, not political or personal, but we can't help but do it, right? On looking at how our districts will be affected or our communities will be affected. But this will change over time, and it'll change as Dennis said, in order to hit socioeconomic that he didn't take into this first pass cut. So it really, I'd suggest we ought to stay in the principled area and not just this makes my district better or worse. Mr. Weber.
I agree with that, but it's interesting to look at. So we have a discussion for some reasons. In the case of retaining 11 with a single member district, what we've heard is it's unfair and stinks to have a single member district. So we're replicating a bad system. And that's wrong. I mean, explain if I'm wrong.
Well, Mr. Constant online, he can defend his.
His constance is the one who does it.
I would be happy to.
Briefly, why don't you respond to that? If single member sucks, why do it for everybody?
I thought that was yours.
No. Single member sucks when you have 5 districts with 2 and 1 with 1. That's when it sucks. And it's fundamentally inequitable because of a number of reasons. And so Mr. Dunbar's proposal of 12 double member districts is much more reasonable than rotating the single member to someone else so they get the short end of the stick for the next 10 years or 20 or 30 years. That's the fundamental difference. And so whether we were to have 11 single member districts or 12 members over 6 districts, those would all, in my opinion, be equitable because you have equal representation for all members of the public. That's the gist.
Mr. Dunbar.
Can I propose a way forward? And obviously this will be for debate once we eventually get to it. If we were to take my proposal, or now the joint Dunbar-Weddleton proposal, and pass it and send it to the voters, they could tell us yes or no, we'll accept the 12th person. They'd have to be next year. And if that failed, then we can come back to the giving everybody a single member district. I don't think we're malapportioned, but I do think we have this inequality right now.
Let's answer that question. Mr. Wheeler, are we malapportioned?
The answer to that question is we don't know, because you don't have current data census. in a format in a way that you can use it. And all the different data sources I've thought about have their deficiencies. So, for example, as Dean discussed earlier, if you look at voter registrations as by district as one way to do it, you're going to get, as he pointed out, numbers that are not particularly helpful because they don't account for people who are either not registered or too young. And in addition to that, if you're looking at voter registrations, the state data has a certain amount of time period before it's purged. Just last week, the state gave us new data for this election that purged 8,000 persons from the rolls because they're presumably no longer participating in local elections or no longer qualified. They've moved away and haven't updated the records. School district data is very interesting because it's got a lot of socioeconomic data in it, but they break it into regions. There's 7 of them, and they're not contiguous with your assembly districts. You could look at new construction in terms of residential housing. That tells you units and not occupancy. So there's a lot of great data out there, but none of it is to the level of detail that U.S. Census data will be because they do it based on going door to door and getting the most accurate information they can.
Yeah, Mr. Gates.
If I could add to what Mr. Weir said, I think you also need to consider the benchmark. The current district boundaries, they were established based on total population. And if you want to, we have a 2-step process. You want to find malapportionment, you should probably use the same data by which those boundaries were established to decide if we're now malapportioned. And then the second step, if you want to use some different data sets to set up new boundaries, I guess you're free to do so, although I recommend total population. But you don't want to combine apples and oranges. Boundaries established by total population. They're malapportioned based on registered voters or something.
Yeah, so summarizing those, I think that I recognize you guys are coming. Hold on. So a couple of those thoughts. We are the judge of our qualifications, and we're the ones who declare ourselves malapportioned. So we need to have a good basis for it, but it's basically our decision with a lot of deference given to how we make that decision. Rephrasing what Mr. Gates said, we made a redistricting plan 9 years ago, 8 years ago, on really good census data. So we better have some pretty good other data to change that because we know what it was based on. And if you then use school district or other non-concrete population data, you have the chance of, certainly things have changed over 8 years, but at least it was done on really good stuff. And so you better have good stuff to change it. And I think, and that's not written down anywhere, but it seems practical, that the later it is, the sort of more of a burden you have before you want, like why would you change in 2019 when you're just about to get real good data again? If something happened right after you're redistricting, a school closed, a base closed, something, right? You could say, well, we have to live with this for another 9 years. Something big happened, let's change it now. But when you're almost at the end and you're about to get a new set of good data, it seemed like you really got to have some good reason to say you're out. So I had the 3 of you, but it was Mr. Dyson first, and Mr. Trainee, and Mr. Wedding.
I'll identify with your remarks. That's really wise.
Please put me in the queue. Okay.
Mr. Trainee, you and I almost cover a couple of decades here.
About 3, Fred.
Yeah, so in my experience, I don't remember a downtown assembly member feeling badly treated or not represented or ganged up on. But I'm notoriously insensitive. And in fact, I thought my feeling has always been a bit the other way. Everybody felt like the downtown was common, everybody wanted it to prosper, look good, be good, and so on. Tell me, let the record reflect, Mr. Trainee nodded.
Yeah. Do you remember Alan Teshi when he represented downtown?
Yes.
There was nobody that could intimidate Alan. I mean, we tried.
Yeah.
Actually, Craig Campbell tried ineffectively to get his attention.
Yeah, and I mean, same with Dave Walsh and Heather Flynn, you know.
Yeah, I know.
Are you guys doing a joint thing?
know,
Are you
what
doing
is
a,
Sorry. We're reminiscing, okay? Give
you
us
want a
break
room?
roll.
Did you have anything more on the screen?
Yes, actually I do.
Okay.
2020 does not mean it's going to come out in 2020.
No, I know.
With lawsuits and everything, if you got it by 2022, you're lucky. Because there may be numerous lawsuits already been filed now. Just wait till it's done, you have lawsuits. And actually, when I hear that the current system we have now doesn't work, having 2 member districts, 1 single, I would argue that the federal government bought off on that. My Department of Justice, we did the last revision, they said it's fine, it does work, meets the legal requirements.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
So I guess 2 questions. One is, when does that data come out? Because I thought we were doing this to get ahead of the game, and I was pretty impressed with this. And I think Fort's idea, okay, next year it goes on the ballot, maybe you do 12, and then we got a year to think about it, data comes out. But so 2, when would we honestly get census data? And 2, why not use permanent fund dividends for counting?
Mr. Wheeler.
I don't know the current plan timeline, have the data done and out from the federal level. I'm sure we could go out to the Census Bureau, see what their tentative schedule looks like, but I don't know what their current production date looks like. With respect to PFD, that's an interesting question, because it's unlikely that people are passing the opportunity to apply. But I don't know how accessible that data is. Right now, there has been some effort to get that information to the State Division of Elections, and that's had a lot of bumps along the road in terms of making sure the data is accurate. And they're getting pretty good at it, but that's an interesting question, because theoretically, people are going to list everybody that's in their household, assuming they're Alaska residents, and for that purpose, they need to be counted in the census just as well. It's an interesting question.
Can we move to Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Trainor?
We're done. That's my question.
That was your question. So it was. Mr. Constant, you're on.
Yeah, just a couple of things there. And hearing going backwards, the PFD question I just wanted to, because it's only citizens of the United States. And that leaves out a whole bunch of people that are captured in the census. But coming back to the question of the inequity between the 2 versus the 1, Mr. Trainee made the comment that the Fed allow it because it meets proportional representation standards. But if you look on the ground, what happens? The downtown has decayed for economic reasons over the last few years, but even worse than that, the Fairview Corridor and the Mountain View have, except for some private and nonprofit work, been left to founder. And so there's ample evidence that it doesn't matter how active and committed and dedicated and hardworking your downtown representative is, it's not the same as having 2 people willing to do that work. Because if you have 2 people willing to do that work, you're going to fight harder, you're going to be in more battles, and you're going to get more done. And so I guess in some ways that argues more for the Weddleton and Dunbar approach. But the bottom line is 1 does not equal 2 in any universe.
Anything more? It's hard to do body language over the top. Thank you, Mr. Constant. So Mr. Dunbar, Gates, and me.
Thank you. So I would echo some of what Chris just said. Just because it's legally acceptable doesn't mean it's practically or sort of morally acceptable. When he put up that example of rotating the single-member district, and I saw it was in Muldoon, I jumped out of my chair. I just don't think that if Muldoon had the single-member district, it would be well represented. And I think all of us would have that reaction if suddenly we were the single member. And actually, in that case, it would be Pete, because I would have it. Good luck. But talking practically about if we were to go forward with the Dunbar-Weddleton plan, the initiative, it would go on the ballot in 2020, and then 2021 will be a mayoral election, and then 2022 will be the first time you have to have the election with the first, if we structured it right, with the new district lines. And in 2 years would be more than enough time to get the census data, and you would both be solving the single member district problem and the malapportionment problem or potential at the same time, because you'd be drawing these new 6 districts, and you could have the best data by 2022. So I think the timeline actually works pretty well in our favor if we were to go forward that way.
Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Gates.
Oh, Thank you, Mr. Chair. I should have mentioned at the beginning that your handouts include two AIMs, well, an AM and an AIM. The first one, AIM 429-2012, was attached to the resolution finding malapportionment. The second one was attached to the ordinance adopting the redrawn boundary map. I want to look at the first one for a moment. It's relevant to that recent discussion about when we received the census data and then we're waiting for the state to finish their redistricting. If you look up the second paragraph, well, at the end of the first paragraph at line 14, the directive to reapportion whenever, and that's part of the charter language, whenever we're malapportioned. This applies when we have sufficient reliable evidence, such as the census data. And although the second paragraph addresses this, we have to reapportion or make a determination about apportionment after the state's done with their process. That doesn't mean we have to sit for a couple of years waiting for the appeals for the state's districting plan to be actually final. We have the census data. This is what happened in 2012. We went ahead and found malapportionment. Assemblymember Birch said, let's do it now instead of waiting, because that's what that charter sentence is about. Whenever we're malapportioned and we have census data, it gives us an indication that we're to 10.6% that total deviation. Let's go ahead and do it. And then most likely when states redistricting plan is finally done, and then we're required by charter to look again, because we've used the most recent census data, we probably won't have to find there's very unlikely to be finding the malapportionment. And then sure enough, after the state's plan was final, and I'm sorry I don't have that resolution, there was another resolution and it found that the lines that were recently finalized before the state finished their redistricting appeal process, it was January 2014 at last. Our boundaries were still okay and we were not malapportioned. So there's another piece here to the 2012 process.
The census website says that census day is 4/1/20, and then they have a couple more milestones. Deliver redistricting data 3/31/21, so essentially by April 1/21 they'll have the data, but the census day, the count day, is 4/1/20. For what that's worth, Mr. Train.
In 2014, they moved a couple of precincts from my area to the downtown to help the numbers work out in both areas. So downtown and East Ridge
So I had
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Constant and then me.
I believe that the reapportionment, whatever we call our portion of it, happened after the state redraws their line. And so the timeline is the census in 20, the publication of the results is 21, the state does their business is 22, we get it then. I think that's the actual timeline.
We went over the timeline before you joined us, and we can do it at any time. And
I understand that. I get that we can declare a malapportionment, but I don't think I would be interested because of your logic that was very sound that if we have real data coming, we should use real data and follow our general procedures. That's just logic there.
Well,
but still, we can be aiming towards a more equitable solution.
There'll be a period where the data is out, but the state's working on it, and what Mr. Gates was saying, I think Mr. Trainee as well, that there'll be a period where you can either, the data's out and you can wait for the state and then you're required by charter to redraw, or you can start using the data while the state's working on it and get your own house in order. Either way, but you're right, the data will come out, it sounds like, early 21. Me and then Mr. Dunbar, and Mr. Wheeler was in as well. You know, as I said when I sort of started this with the now much derided rotate the single member solution, I represented downtown in the legislature for a while. It was a downtown Spenard district, and then it got moved mid my time there to a Spenard and more south, and the downtown went to its own seat. So familiar with that area and representing it. I honestly can't tell whether this is just a perception and not real, because yeah, there's only one, but you're representing half the district. You know, it can be that Turnagain or Sand Lake feels forgotten, and they, you know, but if Turnagain's a single member, then they're just, this is that one person is yours all the time with no divided loyalties or whatever. So I think there's arguments on both sides, but it really didn't matter to me. The perception is really important too. So to the extent downtown feels like it doesn't do them a service, that was good enough for me to want to at least consider how we don't have to get to whether they're right or not. They legitimately feel that that's a thing, and that's good enough for me. Mr. Wheeler and then Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, one, back to Mr. Middleton's question about PFD. I realize just using PFD by itself doesn't contain all the socioeconomic data that you would need. So I forgot to mention that. That occurred to me. Then two more practical things with respect to election timing. I know Mr. Clerk will appreciate this. You want to avoid splits in your precincts. So the precinct isn't divided between assembly districts. So that's something that you're going to think about as you look at these. And in addition, looking at depending what the state might do with its plan, because it may move precinct boundaries, which might create splits that you don't want. And then timing. With respect to timing, I would presume that it would be ideal to have a plan done and approved in such a way that if you're going to implement it for an April election coming up, whenever that might be, you'd want to have it done in the summer so that to the extent possible all challenges are done and candidates can know what district they're running in as they plan for the remainder of that year and then defending their candidacy that next winter. So a couple things just to know for down the road.
Mr. Dunbar. Thank you.
Two things. Talking about groups of people that feel forgotten. Those thousands of people live off Turpin, and I know because I get text messages every time there's an election. Like, why can't I vote for you or Pete? Why, you know, and it's because why don't I vote for the person you were? You get never seen them. They've never talked about the district. You know, we represent that area practically speaking, but they very much feel forgotten. To go off what Mr. Wheeler said. So I'm thinking about the timeline too, and I think we need to edit this language that there's this draft language you put forward. But in the charter change, he said the legislative power of anchors is vested in the assembly member of 12 members. It seems to me that this would sort of immediately, if we change the charter in this way, it would sort of immediately require us to have that 12th person. And I know you could probably mess with the effective date, but the language is going to go before the people. And I wonder if we want to change it, say something like, beginning after the normal election of 2022 or 2023, the legislative power of the anchorage shall be vested in 12 members, something like that. And I'll talk to Dean more about that. And I do think, listening to your timeline, if we want to have all of the maps done and the challenges done in the summer, then I think that probably pushes us out to 2023, right? Because we think that the state's going to finish all their stuff in 2022. Is that right? I mean, to get to, could we have everything done and ready to go in the summer before April of 2022? So it'd be summer of 2021. Could we have things done and ready to go?
I couldn't give you a prediction on that, unfortunately.
Federal lawsuits, state lawsuits.
Well, but the state, and we also heard the state doesn't even really start this process until late 2021 or 2022. Does anyone know when the state starts their?
They're required to start 30 days after they have the data.
Okay,
right?
when do they?
I think I have that written here.
Well, 121 was the date I heard people say they put it out. That
Mr. Chair.
now.
121.
Put you back on, Mr. Johnston.
For April 1st, 21 is a year after the count date, and that the information would be available around that year later date. That's what I just heard someone say.
You can work on that, Mr. Webb, or Mr. Dunbar. Can I go to Mr. Webb? Yeah, Ms. Webb.
So, question are two, I guess. Are our boundaries required to roughly match the state boundaries? And two, because we do vote by mail, why does a precinct matter?
Ms. Wheeler or Madam Clerk?
Anyone who can answer.
I think Mr. Wheeler can answer that for you. It matters, I will tell you that. But go ahead, Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you. Through the chair, historically it's mattered because people who participate in the election process want to know how to respond to their specific precinct or precincts, right? They want to know the vote results by precinct. They want to track how their voters are choosing to elect their representatives by precinct. There are some places that have moved away away from precinct-based reporting.
Comment on that. I'm fairly involved with this stuff. I can't tell you what precinct I'm in. I don't know or care. To me, it's all weird. I know who I voted for.
So Barbara, and then
So, Mr. Weddleton, I can give you an example of how this presents a problem to voters. Dick is correct, and I believe it's precinct 520 in Midtown that is a split, and part of 520 is in Midtown, and part of 520 is downtown. And so when we did have a polling location and voters came in, some of those voters got to vote for Mr. Traney, and some of those voters got to vote for Mr. Constant. That is very confusing for voters. So it's slightly different with vote by mail, and what happens with vote by mail is our statements of votes cast reports by precinct and ballot style. So what's going to end up happening is in this tiny little sliver of precinct 520 that's downtown, those voters, and there's, let's say, 200 voters, and we know exactly, we have a total for how they voted. And so the smaller those groups are, the more likely it is to disclose how a voter voted by having a different ballot style. So our request is, it makes the more ballot styles, it makes the vote more complicated. And the only way to avoid it is to, as Mr. Wheeler said, just get away from precinct voting. But right now, that's the way, that is the system we're doing.
But we can't dump it. We're not required. Just tell me how I did in the assembly district. We can easily just avoid that stuff. So we don't have to do by precinct. We're just in the habit of doing it. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that actually is correct. You'd have to have ballot styles for the taxing service area issues, right? Not necessarily by precinct.
Which we never get away from that.
Mr. Constant, you still on?
Yeah, I'm still here. And Mr. Weddleton, I think that there's another value that comes with the precinct map data, knowing who's voting where, but that's maybe more of a political issue than an ministerial issue. And I wanted to come back to Mr. Dunbar's thought on the language for implementation and make a recommendation that it not be date-specific but process-specific, meaning that the voters say they approve going to the 12 members, then it would take effect after the next reapportionment, right? That way it is not suddenly creating some kind of a crazy deadline that has to be met black and white, but instead is orderly in process. And I'm sure Dean could come up with some mechanism that would do that.
Madam Clerk or Dean or Dennis, have we ever changed the lines enough that we forced everybody to be up for re-election, or we've always had these staggered 3-year terms and just let them finish out their terms? Have we ever done an everybody in the pool year?
Not that I recall, Mr. Chairman.
Me neither. When we first unified, we had the first seats for a year and second seats for 2 years, and then after that it was 3-year terms, something like that. Just a 1975 unification.
You might want to look at 1991's election, because that's when we changed from April to October to April. So that was a screwy election. I don't remember how many we had running that time, but it was a little different. That might be the closest we had.
Yeah, you might want to look at the 91 election.
Sorry. Yeah, just know for the record that all of this is going to play out just a way where Dick is going to be back.
Yeah. We don't know how, so it's going to end at that result.
Barbara plays for me in my area.
Okay, those are the goals I had for this. I want everyone on the same page and thinking about this. If any, I don't believe we are malapportioned, nor do I think we should act before getting good data. If any member thinks we are, they can communicate with me or put together a resolution to that effect. But I'm not taking any action based on one constituent saying, based on voting numbers, that we were malapportioned. Yeah.
When you say take an action, you mean an action to claim we're malapportioned, but I think moving forward we're going to get different.
I don't intend on taking any action at all. I intend on being completely inert, but you guys...
Well, yeah, so there's a different, you're using malapportionment in the legal sense. We could, you know, in the sort of practical sense, you could say that the single member district is like de facto malapportionment, like, but that's not in the legal sense, again, just sort of in the practical sense. So, right, you're saying legally we are not malapportioned doesn't mean we can't go forward with something like a small member district.
Right, you guys can do that? I mean, maybe it'll get done. No.
I would
Go ahead, Mr. Spence.
I would offer that what we're doing now is, and we began it months ago, beginning the public outreach process for the upcoming reapportionment that's based on the census. And so what we're doing is we should be making Mr. Haberman the happiest man in town, because we're going to spend 2 years talking about doing it before we actually do it, which is a way to well inform the public of if a substantial change comes, that a substantial change is coming. So I think we're doing this public process, even just looking forward, without the assumption that we're going to make some short-term declaration now, just on the assumption that we're looking towards what's coming.
Okay. Yes, I meant in the strict legal sense, I'm not taking action as chair to say we're malapportioned now or to move that forward. The proposals to change how we constitute the body and what we put before the public, any member can proceed with, and it sounds like you will. Any other things? Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm thinking about the 12-member idea, and if we didn't have the mayor set up to break tie votes, how would the tie votes be broken?
A measure would fail, same as the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, legislature's 20 and 40, and it works out. That's more numbers, and you know, there's sometimes somebody gone too. Not really often, but sometimes we sit with 10. And
because at the last meeting last Tuesday, we had what 4 or 5, 6 tie votes.
Yeah, that's true.
Meeting, so.
But I think that 6-6 fails now. You need 7 votes, so that changes things a little bit. Really appreciate the work you guys did on the stuff. Did you have more, Mr. Gates?
I was going to say what you just ended with, that if there's a tie, the vote fails. It's end of our welcome.
And you should look into the 91 election.
Looks like we'll be digging into it.
I ran out of time before and did not have any audience participation. Is there any audience member who would like to participate now? Anyone at all? Mr. Haberman, I'm going to time you, but you may talk about any issue on your mind.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself, all the public process, done appropriately, decision made by the governing bodies, my life interest. And I live in Mexico. First, I'm not attacking this group here. I'm just by the announcement of concern. I mean, the announcement when he announced that 8,000 voters were purged by the state. Now, what does that mean? Is it how many they represent Anchorage or Valley, Lower State, or is this strictly Anchorage voters? And if so, what does that do to the election that's in case of like the election in April that's coming up? How many people are going to be surprised? What steps does the state do to allow the opportunity before that could occur? So I'm concerned about the inevitable with the city election and what impact that is having on the voters who are going to go and say, hey, how come I didn't get a mail ballot or so forth like that? So that's the first part. The second part is on this issue right here, where are the numbers? I'm glad there were comments by assembly members, including the chair, where's the numbers, what are we working with? And the census is not going to happen for, it's down the window. And then statements earlier in this meeting were, well, if we go with this, we go with that, what are the true numbers that we've got to deal with? Now, in a previous meeting that I addressed, and I'm glad to hear some comments have fallen in line with that because there was silence on that, but a while back when we were dealing with the changing the boundaries, I stated that you need to add another seat of the assembly. Instead of trying to figure out all the boundaries right now, in essence, you need to add another seat. And when was the last time you had another seat there, another chair there? And that would be the more appropriate direction. And then with 52 seconds to spare, I would like to put on the record the last meeting, like you said, it was an opportunity for public to speak. No, there wasn't. It was, but to put a record, I saw a one-page thing coming from administration, and there was no, what do you call it, signature, no who wrote it, just says administration and not dated. So, and then the last thing on what happened in the previous meeting is this, you were proposing a resolution or whatever, but I'm concerned that becomes part of the 5 o'clock portion of the meeting and not a chance for the public to address it before you approve it, with respect. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Any other public audience participation or public comment? I don't see any other member of the public, so we're adjourned.